Have you ever been erased like you never existed? Not just let go. Deleted from the system, denied credit for everything you built, and replaced by someone who barely knew where the cables ran. That was me. After 15 years holding the company together in silence, they pushed me out in a morning meeting and thought I'd just disappear. I didn't fight back. I didn't scream. I left and built something better. Now they're paying to use it. And they still don't know it's mine. If you've ever been undervalued, I made this for you. So subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments. What did they take from you? They didn't just fire me. They erased me. One moment I was Ava Pierce, Senior Systems Coordinator, with 15 years of hands-on experience navigating government audits, vendor compliance, and operational triage under pressure. The next, my badge wouldn't scan, my email was deactivated, and my internal profile redirected to a generic position close message. No farewell email, no transition plan, just silence, as if removing my name from the system could remove what I'd done for the company. The meeting was a formality, a calendar block titled Realignment Discussion held in a small glass conference room they never used unless someone was being quietly dismantled. Dale, the CEO, showed up 7 minutes late, nodded like he was doing me a favor by being there, and started reading from a pre-written script I'm sure he didn't even skim beforehand. He used phrases like strategic vision, reducing legacy friction, and reallocation of resource bandwidth. I used to decode phrases like that for junior staff. Now they were being used on me. Brenner from HR sat next to him, lips tight like he'd been told not to speak unless asked, and across from me was Logan, their new tech wonderkind. Barely 30, fresh from a consulting firm, and already convinced that dashboards and automation could replace intuition and memory. Logan didn't even look at me, just kept flipping through a sleek tablet, occasionally nodding to himself like he was already running things. He was. I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. I watched them deliver their decision with polished detachment, and when they handed me a white folder with a generic severance package, I didn't reach for it. Dale smiled once, thin, awkward, and said, "We appreciate your contribution, Ava." Contribution. Like I just donated a used printer. I stood up slowly, not out of hesitation, but to make them wait just a little longer. I wanted them to feel how heavy the air had become without me raising my voice. I scanned the room once. My eyes settled on the corner where I once briefed the exec team on a system failure that could have shut down our West Coast corridor. The same corner where Dale praised me for saving the contract that kept our fiscal year afloat. He didn't mention that today. No one did. I walked out of the building with nothing in my hands. No box, no papers, not even my personal effects. I had already moved them the day before. You learn to feel the shift before it lands. The offhand comment in a hallway, the sudden exclusion from planning calls, the pause when your name comes up in a team meeting. I had seen it coming. But I also knew what they hadn't planned for. See, I was never just a coordinator. I was the translator, the buffer between system glitches and government fines, the one who rerouted logistics during winter storms, who flagged early signs of vendor collapse before the contracts even blinked. None of it was written down, not because I was hoarding power, but because no one ever asked. No one cared how it got done, only that it did. And now they thought they could replace me with a platform. They thought Logan's shiny dashboards and AI plugins could replicate Instinct. They thought wrong. I didn't take the severance. I didn't ask for references. I didn't even tell them goodbye. I stepped outside into the cold January air and didn't look back. Because what they'd taken from me wasn't a title or a paycheck. What they'd taken was the illusion that they ever saw me. And what I took from them, that came later. Much later. I didn't return. I redirected. They believed that because nothing was written down, it never existed. That was their first mistake. What they didn't realize was that I never needed a manual. I was the manual. Every system they ran, every contract that didn't implode, every government inspection that passed clean, every crisis that got quietly absorbed into the flow, I had already mapped those events in my head long before they occurred. But try explaining that to a room full of men in suits who believe efficiency is just a number on a dashboard. The things they called unscalable were the very things keeping their operations intact. When I rerouted 3 Eastern Corridor deliveries to avoid a last-minute security lockdown, I didn't document it. I didn't have to. When a compliance auditor flagged a misfiled record from the Johnson account, I had already fixed it 2 days before it triggered a penalty, because I knew how Johnson's rep logged her backups when she was stressed. I knew who needed to be called directly instead of emailed. I knew which vendor's response time dropped when his mother's surgery was scheduled, and which engineer always read line 17 of the compliance report. I didn't carry those details out of loyalty. I carried them because no one else could. But they wanted a system that didn't need someone like me. They thought if they cleared the slate, digitized the process, and built something cleaner, leaner, simpler, they'd be free. But simplicity without memory is just ignorance with a good UI. The irony is that I tried to share what I knew more than once, not through lectures, but in quiet moments. I offered to create bridge documents, to train junior staff on the why behind our emergency procedures, to explain why some protocols weren't failures, they were fail-safes we had learned through blood and near catastrophe. They declined. Too time-consuming, they said, too hard to scale, they said, they wanted plug and play. But my work was never plug and play. Just feel the shift before it cracks. And the moment they shut me out, they lost access to the real map. Because their blueprint was only skin deep, mine was structural. They erased what they couldn't see, assuming the surface was enough. But the cracks weren't on the surface. The cracks were in the rhythm. The way trucks move slightly faster on Thursdays because of unlogged overtime threats. The way Route 29 always lagged during lunar holidays due to unspoken staffing gaps. The way new hire compliance always dipped in Q1 because HR's onboarding portal froze under traffic. Every year without fail. They didn't just lose data when they deleted me, they lost context. And context is the only thing that tells you what's about to break before it does. I didn't remind them. I didn't warn them. They had chosen ignorance dressed as innovation, and what they didn't know was about to cost them. Because when you erase the map, you don't just lose direction, you lose the roads you didn't even know were there. 3 weeks after I disappeared from their system, I got a message on LinkedIn from a founder I barely remembered meeting at a supply chain conference years ago. Her name was Riley Chen, and she ran a small tech startup that specialized in compliance analytics for aerospace subcontractors. Her message was short. You spoke once about building systems that think like people. Are you still thinking about that? I didn't respond right away. I let it sit, not because I wasn't interested, but because I was done wasting energy on people who heard only when it was convenient. But Riley wasn't like them. She followed up with a voice message. Just one sentence. I don't need your resume. I need your brain. That was the first time in months someone had asked for what I actually offered, so I agreed to a coffee meeting. Her office wasn't sleek, no glass walls or subscription espresso, but it had energy, curiosity, and silence that made space instead of pressure. She didn't pitch me equity or some flashy executive title. She asked me what systems fail in silence and what blind spots no software can see. I told her. Not because I was selling, because she actually listened. The next week, I joined their weekly planning sprint. Then I started mapping out what I called behavioral failures, not user errors, but system assumptions that ignore human pattern shifts. The team didn't flinch. They sketched models, they asked questions, they brought engineers into the conversation, not to override the logic, but to reflect it. And just like that, I found myself building something I had never been given permission to build before. A system that didn't just track outcomes, it anticipated fractures. Not with brute force alerts or meaningless KPIs, but with context layers. Audit prep dashboards that adjusted based on seasonal hiring trends, vendor reliability scores that factored in unspoken variables like region-specific weather volatility, even contract templates with embedded historical prompts to flag this usually breaks here. It wasn't revenge, not yet. It was clarity. And for the first time, I wasn't whispering truth into a void. I was laying the foundation for a platform that didn't pretend human memory was irrelevant. I wasn't coming for my old job back. I was building something that made sure they'd eventually have to come to me. Even if they didn't know it yet, still doing the romantic were designed to design it to hurt them. That's the part no one ever believes. The platform wasn't built as a weapon. It was built as a cure for everything they thought could be automated but never actually understood. Riley's team gave me the space and I gave them the framework. Not a rehash of existing models, but a living system, a structure that anticipated the silent fractures before they became public collapse. He called it Helix. Not a logistics tool, not a compliance tracker. Helix was a memory engine. It took all the things corporate systems ignored, unwritten shifts in behavior, context-based triggers, trust decay, and turned them into predictive signals. Not alerts that screamed after the damage was done, but quiet pulses that warned you where to listen. I didn't feed it my old company's data. That wasn't necessary. What I built were universal principles that worked anywhere people operated under pressure and systems pretended everything was fine. We coded in behavioral thresholds, patterns that didn't show up in metrics, but showed up in mood when clients shifted tone subtly across emails, when field teams started using short-form responses more frequently, when site logins dropped 2% but were still marked as healthy by the dashboard. Helix caught those changes, flagged them, gave people a chance to ask questions before they needed to apologize. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. Within 3 months, 2 mid-size aerospace vendors adopted our beta. One of them used it to catch a pre-inspection failure 3 weeks before their scheduled audit. That saved them $280,000, 0 cents. They renewed before the pilot even ended. Word traveled quietly, not in headlines or LinkedIn posts, but through side conversations, back channel recommendations, and sudden demo requests from firms I had never. And then it happened. One of the procurement heads from my old company, someone I had spoken to in over a year, booked a meeting through our inquiry portal. No name attached, just a company email, a burner domain, and a request. Interested in system demo for proactive compliance forecasting, Q3 rollout, urgency. They didn't know who built it, not yet. They were just trying to survive a collapse they hadn't fully diagnosed, but I had. And Helix was built for moments exactly like this. Not to punish, to expose, not to destroy, to reveal what happened when people tried to digitize away memory and called it modernization. I didn't spike the price. I didn't even show up on the call. Riley handled the walkthrough. Her tone was calm, her answers were precise, and when they asked if the system had any foundation in legacy processes, she said, "This system was designed by someone who carried the weight of forgetting so others didn't have to." They didn't recognize the line, but I did, because I had said those exact words once in a budget meeting they barely paid attention to. Now they were paying to hear them again, this time through a system they couldn't afford to ignore. They didn't know it was me, not at first. The contract came through under a generic procurement initiative, buried inside a batch of digital transformation rollouts approved during a crisis control session. By the time their legal signed off, Helix had already been deployed across 2 of their most vulnerable divisions, compliance oversight and supplier integrity. I read the rollout memo forwarded by someone on Riley's team. It was almost poetic. To enhance operational resilience and anticipate vendor risk, we're adopting a third-party behavioral analytics tool to support proactive audits and compliance stabilization. They made it sound like their idea. They had no idea I was reading every single metric they produced, watching them feed usage logs into a system that only existed because they'd refused to listen when I was still in the building. But I didn't smile, I didn't celebrate, I just watched the reports come in, the errors they couldn't explain, the flags they couldn't trace. The subtle corrections Helix made before their dashboards even noticed a blip. They had no idea the code was responding to rhythms I had memorized long before they replaced me. Things like seasonal labor inconsistencies or which suppliers quietly altered their schedules to avoid inspections after a holiday weekend. Helix saw it all because I had seen it all when no one thought it mattered. Now they were paying per seat, per user to reaccess knowledge they once discarded as outdated instinct. They hosted a webinar to promote their new compliance culture. I didn't watch it, but someone sent me a clip. Dale, still CEO, stood in front of a branded slide and said, "We've reimagined how we view risk through systems that learn from human nuance, not just data." He didn't know those words were mine. Verbatim, I had written them in an internal memo that never got a response. Now they were quoted in his keynote. I didn't call him out. I didn't show up. That wasn't the point. The point was this. They had fired the person who built their silent safety net. And now, unknowingly, they had licensed it back from her. Not as an employee, not as a partner, but as a silent line item buried under strategic vendor solutions. I didn't need a title anymore. I had something better. Influence without attachment, power without noise. They thought I was gone. I was just upstream, watching, calculating, collecting what they once believed was disposable. Now it was their most expensive subscription. The dashboard pings every Monday at 6:05 a.m., not because I asked it to, but because that was always the hour when things began to break. The shift after weekend silence. The hour of forgotten resets and overlooked entries. Now Helix alerts me with a soft summary: vendor trust thresholds, behavior drift, flag suppressions, compliance lag indicators. It speaks in the language I invented, translated into clean metrics for people who used to shrug when I warned them something felt off. I don't reply to the alerts, I just read them. I watch as the system predicts the same failures I used to catch with a glance, now dressed in heat maps and variable flowcharts. The company that once erased me is now functioning through a framework that carries my fingerprints in every line of code, every escalation curve, every silent correction. And they don't know that's the part I never needed recognition. Their names show up in the user list, but mine never does. I don't exist inside their org chart. I'm not part of their return to Ocu policy. No onboarding doc references what I contributed. But when they run their quarterly report and the failure rate stays below threshold for the third straight cycle, someone will nod in satisfaction, unaware that the thing holding their numbers steady isn't the system they built, it's the system they lost. A new manager once reached out anonymously through a feature request channel. She asked if Helix could someday anticipate breakdowns in team cohesion before it showed in the numbers. I smiled. She didn't know I'd already started building that layer, because that's what it was always about. Not revenge, not retribution, redirection. They wanted to forget me, so I let them. And in that forgetting, they made room for something better. Not better for them, better for me. I log in, read the reports, make quiet tweaks. Then I close the window and get on with my life. I don't dwell. I don't return. I never applied again. They still think they replaced me. But every Monday, like clockwork, they run on something I left behind. And I'm still the only one who knows how it breathes. They never sent a message, never acknowledged the ripple effects, never even asked what else I had been carrying when I left. But I saw it, reflected in every delayed audit, every panicked contract review, every quiet system patch rushed through after Helix flagged a pattern no one understood. I wasn't looking for credit. I just watched, week by week, as they adjusted to a system they believed was new, not realizing it had been built from the shadows of the one they broke. What they called innovation was just memory, restructured. What they branded as foresight was just my hindsight repackaged. The cost of erasing me wasn't in the press or the market. It was in the gap between what they thought they could rebuild and what I never wrote down. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to be seen. I only needed time. Time to design something so effective they couldn't avoid it, and so quiet they'd never notice whose hands had shaped. That's the difference between being replaced and being remembered. They replaced my name, but they run on my silence, and that silence, that cost, was never on their balance sheet, only mine. Lessons from the story. This story isn't about revenge in the traditional sense. It's about recognition earned through restraint. Ava's journey shows us that not all power needs to announce itself. Sometimes the deepest impact is made not by striking back, but by walking away with what they never realized they needed most: your knowledge, your instinct, your silent contribution. She didn't sabotage, she didn't scream, And she didn't seek applause. Instead, she quietly redirected her energy into something bigger, something that eventually forced those who erased her to depend on what they tried to dismiss. In today's fast-moving, hyper-automated world, it's easy for companies and institutions to undervalue the people who hold systems together with memory, trust, and care. We glorify data while ignoring the people behind it. We replace presence with platforms. But what Ava's story reminds us is that no amount of artificial intelligence can replace emotional intelligence, the unspoken understanding of how people work, what they need, and when things are about to fall apart. And here's the hard truth. Sometimes you won't get credit, you won't get justice, but that doesn't mean you've lost. Because surviving with your values intact and building something stronger from that pain is a form of justice too. Ava didn't need her name on the door. She built the door. And now they walk through it without even realizing who crafted the hinges. How to get started today. Start documenting your value for yourself, even if no one asks for it, in relationships that aren't defined by your title, but by trust. Don't fight to stay where you're undervalued. Redirect that fight into something that reflects your worth. Most importantly, protect your energy. Not everything deserves your reaction. Sometimes silence is your sharpest weapon. If this story reminded you of a time you were overlooked, underestimated, or quietly erased, share it in the comments. You're not alone. And if you're building your own version of a helix, we want to hear about that too. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that speak to your resilience, and share this with someone who's been holding it all together in silence, because they deserve to know they're not invisible and their story isn't over.